Alright class, welcome. This is chapter 13, our final chapter. Hope everyone's doing well. Just a couple housekeeping updates. Hopefully you guys are preparing for meeting with Shane. Lynn was supposed to be your substitute professor, but instead she had something come up, so we had another colleague who's going to be doing your guys' lecture on the 21st, and she's really good. She has a lot of clinical experience over at UCSD, and I believe now she works for mental health systems as well as a clinician. So again, feel free to ask her lots of questions if you have any information. She will be giving you guys your midterm grades. If you have any specific questions that can't wait till I get back, feel free to email me and I can try to find time to help you with that. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started. Alright, so we're going to talk about prevention. Prevention is a traditionally very widely accepted public health model, and it's something that's still used today. There's three different ways that we look at prevention. There's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay, those are the three: primary, secondary, tertiary. The Institute of Medicine looks at the universal level, the selective level, and the indicated level. Now, the public health model that we just saw before and this model are similar but different. And we'll go into more detail about that. But let's talk a little bit about some of the history. So the early preventative efforts started back to the 60s and 70s, and it focused a lot on education and moralizing, as well as scare techniques that we talked a lot about. Thinking of DARE, MAD did a little bit of that, stuff like that. They were proved to be ineffective. So then we had the 70s and 80s, and we have something called affective education, okay? And this is to help students identify and express feelings and to build some sense of self-esteem. What it does is it looks at more in the 70s and 80s is this values clarification. Really what that is decision making. Okay? And then there was the alternatives to use. So what are some alternatives to using drugs and alcohol or any other substance that may be appealing? Another focus was social skills. If we develop problem solvings and methods of resistance, then we know that those will be some interventions that could be potentially successful. So we talked about DARE. So it started back in 1983 by the LAPD, and it was really targeted for 5th and 6th graders. And time again, it has proven to be ineffective. Yet, we continue to operate it today. In 2001, there was something called the quote-unquote new DARE. It was basically the precursor of Just Say No, but it still went based upon the fundamental philosophy of zero tolerance. So there was kids that were being singled out, alienated through locker searches, through pat-downs, so there's a lot of opportunity for potential discrimination, as you can imagine. But really what this is doing is it doesn't take into account the trajectory, which we hopefully understand by now, of exactly how substance abuse, the etiology of substance abuse, and that zero tolerance is important, but when you're talking about somebody who is looking to get help, this kinds of things isn't probably the best approach. It's not the most inviting. So in the 80s, prevention efforts began to shift towards the environment. There's something called normative education. Okay, these are norms that are perceived rules of behaviors that influence attitudes and actions. Okay, Misperceived norms means that everybody does it, can exert the same influence. So basically what this is looking to do is correct students' erroneous beliefs about the prevalence of use. So we're looking to change behaviors, we're looking to change attitudes, we're looking to change belief. Okay, through normative education. Proactive prevention incorporates strategies of the earlier models in a more comprehensive program. So it takes in a normative education with accurate information and puts together positive attitudes and behaviors. And there's another environmental approach to prevention, which is focusing specifically on drug availability. So think of neighborhoods, think of go out to City Heights, go out to a lot of those neighborhoods that are very low SES and compare that to neighborhoods that would be maybe more up north and the more affluent neighborhoods of maybe Del Mar, Encinitas, La Jolla, etc. And you're going to have very different accessibility to different types of substances. So, back in this period of time, one way to limit availability was taxation, okay, of legal drugs. So how much do cigarettes cost now? They're extremely high. Alcohol has a high tax rate. So the idea was that as price increases, use decreases. Is that always true? We don't know. I think that's debatable. There was also laws regulating the age of consumption, the sale, the advertising, who can provide the marketing to what age demographics, etc. So those were laws that were regulating who can be targeted and who can buy, sell, and use. So for some, experimentation is just a normal rite of passage. Usually it's a phase that will be outgrown. So as we move away from the preventative model, we're going to look more here at the comprehensive prevention, okay? Comprehensive prevention strategies incorporate multi-levels of intervention. So we're going to go and talk about specifically about the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. Okay, with multiple populations at the universal, selective, and the indicated level. With multiple strategies, the informational, the effective, and the environmental stuff. With a network of resources. So we're pulling together all of these different resources and coming together in a much more collaborative, synchronous effort. And what it's doing is it's addressing a variety of environmental factors. Instead of targeting one aspect, we're coming together and we're working at this from a very comprehensive, collective approach. There's sensitivity to diversity and there's appropriate development because there's multiple effects and consequences of use. So we have to really be able to address all of these needs at once. There's a need for a long-term effort. So what is community prevention? So an example of comprehensive program is the CASA START. CASA START was developed at the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University. What it does is it works to enhance protective factors through intensive case management to deter use in 18 to 13-year-olds. So this isn't a shaming, guilting program. This is a program that strictly provides very intensive, very rapid responding environmental, social, psychological, mental, whatever resources to deter youth. So because we know the sooner we can intervene, the greater likelihood of lowering risk. So again, this is done through case management, family services, educational services, after school and summer activities, mentoring programs, and a variety of different incentives. Community policing and enhanced enforcement. This is an important piece where police officers, instead of taking the approach of punishing, now they're getting involved in the community. They're looking to be more of a face, more of a community member, and less of an authoritative figure. The juvenile justice intervention, although there's still punishment involved, it's minimized, and the goal is to rehabilitate. Primary partners are social services, agencies, schools, law enforcement, any sort of community organization, maybe a church, maybe anything along those lines. So when we're talking about risk and protective factors, we're looking at the protective factors that are associated with, again, reducing the potential for abuse, right? Remember, when we're talking about risk and protective factors, what are the difference? Protective factors are those things that we know will help limit or mitigate risk. And when risk outweighs protective factors, that's when we have the higher likelihood of long-term problems. So the key risk periods occur during those major life transitions. We talked about that last week when we were talking about adolescence. Those big life transitions: puberty, moving, divorce, marriage, moving out of mom and dad's house, it's on there, but all of those big major life transitions. And then death, ultimately, of friends and loved ones. So no one risk factor can predict a person's substance use, okay? However, we do know that the effect is cumulative as far as the more number of factors you have and the timing of those occurrences, they do place somebody at a stage of more vulnerability. So what does that mean? What does that look like? So if somebody has all of these things stacked up against them, there's constantly, so one risk factor by itself, let's say education, standalone education by itself, there's nothing to say that this person's at greater risk. But when you start to have this compounding effect where all of these other risk factors that we know of start to play out, then we know that somebody becomes very, very vulnerable. And that's where that key intervention piece comes in. So when we're using the public health model, which you can look on in your book on page 346, we're going to talk about the agent, which is the drug, the host, okay, which is the user. This includes expectations, personality, physiology, and genetics. The environment. This is probably starting to look a little bit familiar. Maybe something called the biopsychosocial model, somewhat. The social, cultural, and political, economic variables, we've got environmental factors. Those all kind of come together. And so the risk factors are characteristics that occur statistically more often than those who develop problems. And those are indicators of trouble. Adolescent use is characterized by high stress, low parental support, and low academic competence. These are things that we talked a lot about, I believe, when we talked about adolescence. So it's an important goal to change the balance so protective factors outweigh the risk factors, which we had mentioned before. We really want protective factors to outweigh the risk. Life skills training. So this was developed by Bothan out of Cornell University, and it is a primary prevention, school-based, universal classroom program that's really addressing a number of critical preventative components in what we call an integrative fashion. It's geared toward middle school and junior high students, so we're really looking at that 15 to 17-year-old with three major components. General self-management skills, which we talked about, I think, before, which is problem-solving, coping. General social skills, which is that communication, healthy relationships. And then the information skills specifically towards drug-related actions. So the awareness of social influence, the normative education. So what are some of the steps to effective prevention program? Hallmarks of the best programs: planning, implementing, evaluation, ongoing program revision. Those are key when we're talking about the programs that have the best success, the best outcome. Incorporate these four things. There's proper planning, there's proper implementation, there's evaluation of success. We're looking at measurable outcomes. Is this working or is it not? If it's not working, what are we doing to make it better so it will continue to work? So we're tracking data. We call that evidence-based programming or data-driven decision making. This is most effective when we're working from an interactive technique period. So peer discussion groups, role-playing, modeling, etc. Alright? If there's any questions about that, please feel free to email me. That was a really quick lecture, but I wanted to make sure I got it out to you guys. This one's super easy, very straightforward. If you have questions, again, feel free to ask me I'm available by email. My response time might be a little slower, but I will be available by email to respond to any questions or concerns you guys might be having. Be looking for your final study guide. I'll probably send it out on the 28th, so you guys will have that by the time we meet on the 30th to start working on your reviewing. Alright everybody, enjoy Shane, let me know how things go, and we'll see you guys in about a week and a half. Bye-bye.